Hi everyone and welcome to Niamh's Art Journaling channel. Today we're going to be creating an abstract Valentine's page. It's a really quick art journal layout. So I'm starting in my Dina Wakley craft journal and I'm working on craft pages, which aren't my favourite to work on. I struggle with them sometimes and I tend to just cover them completely with collage, but I'm really trying hard to leave some white space. So I'm starting with just adding some fluffy modelling paste onto my page and just using a palette knife to put some texture into it. So I knew I wanted to paint over the top, but I wanted to have some texture underneath to just add some interest to my page. Now this fluffy modelling paste is from the Crafters Workshop. It takes a lot less time to dry. So it's really quick, and I'm just hitting it with my heat gun just to make sure that it is dry. It doesn't need to be completely dry before you start painting over the top, but as long as the top surface is dry enough that when you put paint over it, you're not going to be moving it and stirring up anything from below, which is why I keep touching it just to make sure that it's set enough on the top that I can paint over. So the palette that I'm using for this, this didn't actually set out to be a sort of Valentine's-y type page. It's just ended up being that way with the colours I used. So I'm using gesso to paint over the page, and again I'm not painting the whole page. I'm leaving some of that craft paper as my white space, so to speak. And on the side of my mat you can see that I've got some fuchsia paint, magenta, blushing, ruby, some more white and buff and cheddar. I don't think I actually ended up using the buff and cheddar. I decided just to go with that pure, warm, reddy purpley colours. So I'm going in with a really wet paintbrush and sort of just spreading out my paint. I'm not cleaning in between because I want the mixture of paints happening. So you get a sort of organic mix between it. This is inspired by a piece I saw, and I cannot remember the artist. As soon as I do, I will put it down in the link below. That I saw on Instagram. It's also inspired by a piece I saw by Adele Toomey, which is Inky Quills, one of her big paintings, and she just on a big canvas did lots of block painting in this sort of style. I just really loved how the paints worked together and how you sort of got that block colour, but it had the texture in it and the paint markings in it, which again is why I wanted to put the texture paste underneath. Now as I was doing it, I realised I'd covered up a lot of my white and I was really unhappy with that. And then I decided I wouldn't mind doing some drips. So I held my page up and wet it. Now fortunately, because it's acrylic paint and it's quite warm at the moment, my acrylic paint dried quite quickly, so you can see I didn't get much pigment coming down the page. So I decided to do it again by wetting the acrylic paints off the side of my page and transferring those onto my page. That worked slightly better, but I still wasn't getting the effect that I wanted. And this is where the inspiration from that other artist from Instagram came in, because they'd sort of done the block painting similar style to Adele, but they had the drips coming down. And I am fascinated by getting drips to work and how organic they work, but I never quite get them as successfully as I want them to. Now, those people who follow this channel know that I tend to use my heat gun a lot to set my paint, and it does come up with some interesting texture sometimes. Because I had that modelling paste underneath, it did start to bubble up and actually gave me more texture than I had previously, which I really loved on the page. Now I work in a really well ventilated area. It's never been a problem for me, but if you know any paints or anything that you're doing and you start to get an effect from it, make sure you've got an open window or something. So you can see here I've got more pigment coming down my page by just adding the water. Then I decided to add the paint directly to the page and spritz it to see what would happen. But the paint still wasn't moving quite the way I wanted it to. I was getting beautiful puddles underneath though, which is looking great for my paper towel. So once I sort of cleaned that up, I then dried it off again, and I decided that I might try using ink instead and adding some black to the page. Now I have a love-hate relationship with black. well, not really a love-hate relationship. I love it. It's just I tend to get really heavy-handed with it, and then I hate what it looks like at the end. So I decided to be really sensible when I was doing this and actually water it down to begin with. Now I'm using acrylic drawing ink, and I'm watering it down as I go. And when it first went on the page, it looked really, really dark, and I was really happy with it. But as it started to dry, it actually lightened up an awful lot, which I wasn't as happy with. Then I decided to sponge some of it off, which of course made it look even paler than it did. So just play around with what you're doing and have a go to see what you're happy with and what you like. By having it quite watery, it really helps. Now this is one fact I do like doing when I've got ink, is to spritz it, and you can see it gets really feathery and fills in all those cracks. It's great for picking up on texture because it just runs into those little bits of texture, but it does dilute the ink down an awful lot. So I was liking how now that I had quite a shaded piece in the background, it did lose a lot of its natural vibrancy, so to speak, but it became really interesting having the black over the top, which I quite liked. So this is all experimenting, and that's what I use my art journal for, is just to play around with different techniques and to see what I like and what I don't like. So here I'm getting really brave and actually just going on with pure ink and dropping that down the page. And again, just spraying over the top just to help it run a little bit more. Now, if you're really concerned about your other pages in your journal, you may not like to do that, or you may want to put some paper towel in between your different journal pages just to make sure you don't have that transfer. In the end, I only had a tiny little bit go onto the other page. It didn't actually transfer all that much. The one thing that I did transfer on was some gesso onto another page, so the ink wasn't actually the problem, it was me being messy when I was gessoing. I'm just going in with a fine brush again to add some darkness back into some of the details, but you can see now they've just got that little bit more punch to what I'm doing. I'm desperately trying to keep the white space, which is the craft paper, so to speak, but I just couldn't do it, particularly at the top. I did leave it at the bottom, but I decided I needed, the black didn't make sense just starting where the paint did, so I needed to add the black up the top, just to sort of make sense in my head of where it was coming from. So I'm just going in now and drying my entire piece to make sure it's as dry as possible, because I knew I wanted to go back in with some white. When I was looking at it, it was looking quite dull again, and I wanted to add some white into the piece just to add a little bit of brightness to it. When I've done it and sort of looking at it now, I wonder if it was the right thing to do, because the white over the top sort of looked a little bit cloudy rather than the bright that I wanted. I think it needed to have the contrast with the black, but it worked in a manner of speaking. I think if I did something similar to this in future, I would possibly put the white in before I did the ink drips again, so it looked a little bit more blended in with my page. Once I'd finished this, I wanted to really pick up on some of the texture that I had, so I went in with a gold Inca wax and just rubbing it over the top, and you can see that sort of picking up all the texture on the page, and I really loved how that helped combine the piece, and it also blended the gold back into the background, so it looked a little bit more like it should be there. I also put the gold over the black at the top to dull it down a little bit, and it kind of ties it back into the craft at the bottom of the page, which I was really happy with. So once I'd finished with this, my inspiration had gone completely off course from what I was sort of imagining I was going to do to begin with, but it sort of came back with this final bit. Now, the piece that I saw on Instagram, she created this border by putting some scribbly writing across the bottom, which I really liked, using a black and white pen. So I found a quote that I really liked on Pinterest, and I wrote that across the bottom in both the black and white. Now, they didn't line up, they're both different sized fonts, so you sort of get this overlap thing happening, which I really liked. While I did that, I needed a focal image on this page. Now, I had this gel print that was sitting next to me. I'd used it in a previous project, And I really liked how the colours matched in together. It's using the fuchsia, which is one of my favourite colours, but I had some lapis and so on in it. So it really sort of picked up on the page. But just being on its own, it blended into the page too much. It needed something to stand out. So I decided to put a little bit of book text behind it. So I tore out some of the gel print that I had, but I couldn't actually bring myself to use that piece that I tore out because I really love that gel print in the background. So I ended up using another piece of book paper in the end. I then went around the heart with the Stabilo Oil pencil, which is a water activated pencil, just to give that darker outline, again to sort of pop it off the page a little bit, and also transfer it onto another page that I can use in the future. So when I've done that, I've got my Tim Holtz ideology stickers, the chat stickers, and I was just going through to find a quote that I really liked, and I ended up with "Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable," which I thought fitted in really nice to this page, because I imagined what I was going to have, and this was the unimaginable. It didn't happen the way I wanted it to, but I really loved the results in the end. So once I've done that, just cutting it up into small pieces so it would fit into the heart. I quite like chopping up those little sentiment strips into pieces. They make them, again, look a little bit more haphazard, and that you can sort of break them up into almost like little verses of poetry. So going back, I found this piece of dictionary that was floating around again in my collage stash, and I thought I'd use that instead. So just sticking down my glue, I'm using the Gina K Connect glue, which I got my hands on recently, and I absolutely adore it. It's really brilliant adhesive. It glues down really, really quickly, dries clear, and it comes in a pen bottle like you can see with a fine nib. As of yet, it hasn't clogged on me, which I really love too, because I often struggle with glues and fine adapters. So once I'd done that, I decided it just needed a little bit more writing around it. So I repeated the quote that's on the heart around the heart, and then like I did in the background, I did it in black, and then I'm doing it in white again. Now I used a food ball pen, which I love to write and will write over everything, but it does take a little while to dry, which is why I heat set it. So this is pretty much the finished piece. A little bit different. Definitely abstract. It's a fun background to make, so you could certainly do it in any colour combination, and it was really quick to create. I think this in its entirety took me about half an hour to do. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye for now.